Who would risk a storm, a stranger's kitchen, and a locked barn just to leave behind a pot of hot stew? The lantern shook as thunder rolled across the Colorado hills. Judson pushed open his kitchen door and froze. A stew pot bubbled softly over the fire. A clean knife rested on the table, and muddy footprints disappeared into the rain toward his barn. Who was hiding there? And why? Share where you're watching from before the story begins. Rain swept down from the Colorado foothills in silver sheets, drumming against Judson Cray's hat and running cold beneath his collar. By the time he rode through the ranch gate, darkness had swallowed the lower pasture. He had spent 3 hours searching for a calf separated from the herd. The animal now lay tied across the saddle behind him, weak but alive. Judson's bay mare slowed near the house. A yellow light burned in the kitchen window. Judson pulled the reins. His father could not have lit the stove. Elias had barely left his bed in 6 months, and that morning he had refused both coffee and broth. Judson dismounted without taking his eyes from the window. He loosened the revolver beneath his wet coat, crossed the muddy yard, and opened the back door. Heat touched his face. The kitchen was cleaner than it had been when he left. The knife had been washed. The table had been wiped. Fresh water stood beside Elias's bedroom door. An iron pot hung above the fire. Judson lifted the lid. Steam rolled upward, carrying the smell of browned beef, onions, potatoes, and thyme. Beside the stove sat a rough loaf of bread wrapped in a clean flour cloth. Nothing seemed stolen. "Who cooked this stew?" he called. Only the rain answered. Then a board creaked outside. Small, muddy footprints crossed the back step and disappeared toward the barn. Judson took the lantern from its hook and followed them. Inside the barn, the horses shifted in their stalls. Their breath rose white in the cold air. Judson heard a faint scrape above him. He climbed halfway up the hayloft ladder and raised the lantern. A woman stood behind the stacked hay, gripping a pitchfork with both hands. Her brown traveling dress was soaked along the hem. Her shoes were nearly worn through. Beside her lay a battered suitcase, a folded horse blanket, and a small bowl streaked with the remains of stew. She was afraid. Judson could see it in the tightness around her eyes, but she did not lower the pitchfork. "Did you cook what's in my kitchen?" he asked. "I did." Her voice was steady despite the cold. "I took only what I used. I'll work off every bit of it." Judson looked at the suitcase. A sealed envelope bearing Horace Abernathy's store mark rested inside. "Sure, you came from Copper Creek." The woman's hands tightened on the wooden handle. "My name's Nell Archer." Judson had heard whispers outside the general store that afternoon. A black woman had arrived by stage expecting Horace Abernathy to meet her. Horace had hidden behind his counter while his clerk carried the news. "What happened?" Judson asked. "The storm caught me on the road." "That isn't what I meant." For a moment, Nell stared past him toward the open barn door. Then she said, "Mr. Abernathy invited me here from Ohio. He wrote that he meant to marry me. By the time I arrived, he had married Clara Albright." Judson said nothing. "The hotel wanted payment in advance," she continued. "I could afford a room or enough food to leave town. Not both. So you chose my barn. I chose a roof where no one would stand around watching me sleep." A hard gust rattled the barn doors. Nell finally lowered the pitchfork. "I was hungry," she said. "Your house sounded sick. I heard someone coughing through the rain, so I cooked enough for all of us." The previous afternoon returned to her in sharp pieces, the stage stopping beside the Copper Creek platform. Samuel Peterson twisting his hat between his hands. "Mr. Abernathy married Miss Clara Albright last Tuesday." Nell had asked whether Horace knew she had already left Ohio. Samuel's silence had answered. He offered her an envelope containing money for an eastbound ticket. Nell had not opened it. Through the general store window, she saw Horace watching her. Clara stood behind him, arranging ribbons on a shelf. Horace stepped away rather than face her. Near the blacksmith shop, Voices lowered as Nell passed. The hotel keeper glanced at her suitcase and demanded payment before giving her a key. Nell counted the coins in her purse twice. Then she sat behind the stage station until the mountains darkened. She took out her mother's herbal notebook, but her hands shook too badly to read the familiar writing. There was no family farm waiting in Ohio. Her parents were gone. The land had been sold to settle their debts. When thunder rolled over Copper Creek, Nell put Horace's unopened envelope at the bottom of her suitcase and walked west. Now, in the Cray barn, she lifted that suitcase. "I'll leave," she said. "The rain will break before morning." Judson looked toward the black road beyond the barn. Before he could answer, a weak voice carried from the house. "Judson." Both of them went still. "Bring me some of whatever that is." Judson hurried back through the rain. Elias lay beneath two quilts, his face thin against the pillow. When Judson held the bowl near him, the old man opened his eyes and breathed in the steam. He ate one spoonful, then another. His hand trembled, but he did not turn away. "Sarah make this?" Elias whispered. Judson's throat tightened. Sarah had been dead 5 years. "No," he said. "A woman sheltering in the barn did." Elias looked toward the hallway. "Then stop leaving her in the barn." Judson returned, carrying the empty bowl. Nell was standing near the door, ready to step into the storm. "My father ate," he said. "I'm glad. I need a cook, someone to keep the house and help with him." Nell studied his face. Judson offered $10 a month, meals, and a private room beside the kitchen. She could leave whenever she wished, with every dollar owed to her. "Does the room lock?" she asked. "It will before you sleep there." "Is this charity?" "My father ate because of you. That sounds like work to me." Nell looked at the house, then at the road. "I want the terms written down." Judson nodded. "They will be." He took her suitcase, but only after she released the handle. As they crossed the yard, a wagon lantern paused on the distant road. Inside the wagon, Horace Abernathy watched Nell enter the Cray house. Samuel Peterson sat beside him in uneasy silence. Horace drew the curtain halfway closed. "This cannot become town business," he said. Samuel Peterson looked through the rain-streaked wagon window toward the Cray house. Nell Archer had already disappeared inside, but the kitchen light remained visible across the dark pasture. "It became town business when you left her standing at the stage platform," Samuel said. Horace turned sharply. Samuel lowered his eyes, though he did not take back the words. By dawn, the storm had moved east. Nell woke in a narrow room beside the kitchen. Her suitcase rested on a wooden chest instead of the floor. The broken latch had been repaired, and a new brass key lay on the washstand. There was no note. She turned the key in the lock, opened the door again, and stood listening. Judson's boots crossed the porch outside. An axe struck wood near the shed, steady and unhurried. The kitchen showed years of neglect. Soot darkened the stove. Grease had hardened around the pan handles. The flour sack stood open, its top layer gone stale. Nell cleaned only what she needed. By sunrise, biscuits browned in the oven. Salt pork hissed in a skillet, and weak coffee steamed in 3 chipped cups. Judson entered carrying split wood against his coat. He stacked it beside the stove, washed at the basin, and sat down. Nell remained standing. Judson looked at the empty chair across from him. "You cooked it," he said. "You ought to sit while it's warm." Only after she took her place did he reach for a biscuit. Later, he brought out the ranch ledger and wrote their agreement at the kitchen table. $10 each month. Meals, a private room, household work and assistance with Elias. Freedom to leave whenever she chose. Nell read every line. "No one enters my room without permission," she said. Judson added the sentence without argument. From down the hallway came Elias's dry cough. It sounded almost like a laugh. Nell began with broth for him. She placed the bowl on a stool outside his closed door. The next morning, it remained untouched. She tried soft bread and stewed apple. Most of that remained too. Instead of knocking harder or pleading through the door, she watched what disappeared and changed the next tray accordingly. Her mother's herbal notebook stayed open near the stove, its pages softened by years of flour and steam. There were remedies for fever, coughing, and weak digestion. Nothing in it claimed food could save a man who had stopped caring whether morning came. Still, Nell kept cooking. She opened windows that had not been raised in years. Dust floated through the sunlight. She washed one curtain and left Sarah's sewing basket exactly where it stood. A cracked blue bowl was bound with thin wire and returned to the shelf. Thyme and sage went into a wooden box beneath the kitchen window. The house slowly filled with sound. A knife against a chopping board. Dough pressed beneath steady palms. Water splashing into the basin. The low simmer of the iron pot. Judson answered those sounds in his own way. He replaced a loose board beside the pump. Fresh flour appeared in the pantry, along with sugar and better coffee. He drove a small iron hook into the wall for Nell's apron. The woodpile beside the kitchen grew waist-high. He never mentioned any of it. One afternoon, the bowl outside Elias's room vanished. The empty dish returned the next morning. Nell washed it without comment. 3 days later, she browned beef in the iron pot and added barley, onions, dried carrots, potatoes, and thyme. The scent worked its way beneath the bedroom door. Judson sat at the table repairing a bridle. His needle scraped through leather. Then came another sound, a slow, dragging step. Elias stood in the kitchen doorway, one hand pressed against the frame. His nightshirt hung from his narrow shoulders. His gray face looked carved from old wood, but his eyes were fixed on the stove. Judson rose so fast his chair struck the floor. Elias glanced toward the pot. That stew could remind a dead man he was hungry. Nell did not hurry toward him. She pulled out a chair and waited. Elias crossed the room one careful step at a time. She served him half a bowl. He frowned. "You feeding me or a sparrow? Birds survive winters men underestimate." The corner of his mouth moved. Judson watched his father eat every spoonful. That evening, Nell stood at the basin washing dishes while the last light faded beyond the pasture. Judson lingered behind her with an empty coffee cup. "I had begun measuring him for a coffin in my head," he said. Her hands stopped beneath the water. "Then stop measuring." The words were quiet. They struck harder than anger would have. Later, Elias spoke of Sarah, Judson's wife, dead 5 years from fever. Judson had burned her bedding and packed away nearly every reminder of her. After that, the house had become orderly, useful, and silent. Nell told Elias about the influenza winter that took her parents. Their Ohio farm had been sold for debts. Horace's letters came while she worked in a boarding house kitchen, promising land, marriage, and a home of her own. "I did not cross that distance only for a man," she said. "I came because I wanted a life that belonged to me." Judson stood in the dark hallway, listening. Over the next weeks, he showed Nell the safest trail to the creek and taught her which mare would not shy at a flapping coat. She treated a cut on his palm with comfrey paste from her mother's notebook. He watched her fingers wrap the clean cloth, then thanked her without looking away. She taught him to judge risen bread with one careful press of his thumb. They began sharing coffee before sunrise. Sometimes Judson remained at the table after his cup was empty. Sometimes Nell found herself listening for his boots on the porch at dusk. Neither spoke of it. In Copper Creek, Horace spoke enough for everyone. He told customers Nell had misunderstood his letters. He claimed she had appeared without invitation and forced herself into the Cray household. He suggested Elias was too sick to know what he was signing. Clara Albright heard the stories and asked why Nell still had his correspondence. "Friendly letters," Horace said. Clara watched him turn away before answering. Samuel rode to Cray Ranch, carrying a sack of flour and a receipt. Near the barn, he found Nell gathering thyme before the first frost. "Mr. Abernathy is telling people you forced your way into this arrangement," he said. "Will you tell them otherwise?" Samuel looked toward town. "I have employment to consider." Nell closed her mother's notebook. "So did I when he sent me across the country." Samuel rode away with his shoulders bent. That night, Judson found a notice nailed to the barn door. It announced that a county representative might inspect the Cray household because of concerns about Elias's condition and the presence of an unrelated woman on the property. Judson ripped it down and crushed it in his fist. When he walked away, Nell gathered the torn pieces from the mud. She fitted them together beneath the kitchen lamp and read every word. By morning, the notice lay folded inside the ranch ledger. Judson did not ask what she had done with it. Nell did not ask why his jaw tightened whenever he looked toward the road. Autumn settled over Copper Creek in yellow cottonwood leaves and thin ice around the pump. Elias came to breakfast most mornings now. He leaned on his cane, complained about weak coffee, and argued with Judson over fence posts as though illness had merely delayed the discussion. Beside the kitchen window, Nell's thyme and sage still held their color. One cold afternoon, she found Judson fitting a slanted cover over the herb box. "Scrap wood," he said. Nell ran one finger along the smooth edge. He had sanded away every splinter. She said nothing, but that evening his coffee remained warm beside his plate. The ranch books soon revealed trouble of another kind. Nell compared store receipts with the supplies in the pantry and tack room. 6 sacks of grain had been charged, but never delivered. Lamp oil appeared twice in the same month. A new plow blade existed only in Horace Abernathy's handwriting. Judson studied the figures, then pushed the ledger back toward her. We stopped buying from him. He did not question her arithmetic. He did not call it women's work or luck. After that, he began asking what she thought before making purchases. At night, Judson sat near the barn lantern with a pale piece of pine and a pocket knife. Elias caught him turning it in his hands. "What is it?" "Nothing yet." A wing had already begun to appear. Elias smiled into his coat collar. "You never carved anything you did not care about." Judson slipped the wood into his pocket. The first snow came early. Clouds pressed low against the high pasture one October morning, hiding the ridge above the cattle line. Judson saddled his bay and said he would bring down the last strays before dark. Nell stood at the gate with her shawl drawn tight. "That sky is closing. I know the trail. You also know how to be late." His mouth almost softened. "I'll be back before supper." He was not. At dusk, the bay mare stumbled into the yard alone. One stirrup hung torn. A dark stain marked the saddle leather. Elias gripped the porch rail. "We need neighbors." Nell looked toward the ridge. Another curtain of snow was moving down the mountain. "If we wait until morning, we may be bringing back a body." She saddled the calm gray mare Judson had taught her to ride. Into the saddlebags went rope, blankets, a lantern, willow bark, and strips of clean cloth. She stopped at a neighboring ranch and pounded on the door until a ranch hand agreed to follow. Above the timberline, snow erased the trail. The lantern flame shook inside its glass. Wind pushed against them hard enough to turn the horses sideways. Nell found Judson's glove caught on a broken branch. Farther on, a horse screamed below the trail. Judson lay beside a fallen pine, one leg trapped beneath twisted tack. His shoulder sat wrong beneath his coat. Snow had gathered along the brim of his hat. When he saw Nell, anger and relief crossed his face together. "You should not have come." She dropped to her knees beside him. "Then you should have returned when you said you would." With the ranch hand's help, she freed his leg. She tore cloth from her underskirt and bound his shoulder against his chest. Judson tried to rise and nearly folded. "Enough," Nell said. "I can walk." "Pride cannot carry you downhill." They placed him on the gray mare. Nell walked beside the bridle through snow nearly to her knees, refusing to add her weight to the horse on the narrow descent. Back at Cray Ranch, she cut away Judson's frozen sleeve and set his shoulder while Elias held the lamp. Judson cursed once, then bit down on a folded strip of leather. By midnight, fever had taken hold. Nell stayed in the chair beside him, changing the cloth on his forehead. Near dawn, Judson opened his eyes and reached for her hand. "Sarah." The name came out broken. He realized his mistake and pulled away. Nell lowered her eyes and changed the compress. In the morning, he said, "I am sorry." "You called for someone you lost," she answered. "That is not an insult to someone who stayed." During his recovery, they spoke more honestly than before. Judson admitted that after Sarah died, every attachment felt like something waiting to be taken. Nell sat by the window with her mother's notebook closed in her lap. "Horace taught me the opposite fear," she said, "that a person can give up everything and still be set aside when something easier comes along. You are not temporary here." She looked at him. "Is that a promise? Or only a need?" Judson had no answer ready. The silence between them changed. One morning, Nell stood on a stool reaching for cinnamon. Judson stepped behind her and took down the tin. Their fingers met around it. Neither moved. From the next room, Elias struck his cane against the floor. "Does breakfast intend to cook itself?" Nell stepped down. Judson turned away, though not before she saw the color rise above his collar. In town, Horace had found an older weapon. Years before, a neighboring cattle owner had disputed the spring running through Crayland. Elias's illness had left old questions unanswered. Horace encouraged the man to file a new claim and whispered that Nell was directing both father and son. Samuel Peterson saw Horace copying property entries after closing time. This time, Samuel copied them too. The Copper Creek community supper was meant to quiet the rumors. Elias insisted on attending. "If I hide in that house," he said, fastening his old black coat, "they will decide I am already buried." Nell carried a large iron pot of beef stew into the meeting hall. Some people greeted her. Others watched without speaking. Clara Albright stood near the wall, her eyes moving between Nell and her husband. Horace waited until every bench was filled. Then he raised his voice. "Is this the same stew that earned you a room at Cray Ranch?" The scrape of spoons stopped. Horace spoke of manipulation, of a sick old man, of a woman who had arrived uninvited and made herself necessary. Nell reached for the packet of letters inside her coat. Judson stepped between them. "You knew she was coming," he said. "You let her cross half the country because facing her would have cost you less than canceling your wedding." Horace denied every word. Samuel stared at the floor. Elias rose with his cane. "That woman did not take control of my house," he said. "She gave it back." His hand closed over his chest. The cane struck the floor. Elias collapsed beside the table, overturning the iron pot. Broth spread across the boards as Judson dropped to his knees. While he lifted his father, Nell saw a folded paper beneath Horace's boot. Across the top were the words, "Petition to review the competency of Elias Cray." The words stayed with Nell all the way back to Cray Ranch. Judson carried Elias from the wagon while rain tapped softly against the porch roof. The doctor arrived from Copper Creek near midnight with a black leather case and mud to his knees. He listened to Elias's heart, checked his breathing, and ordered him to remain in bed. "Another strain like that could finish what the fever started," he said. No one touched supper. The kitchen still carried the smell of spilled stew from the meeting hall. Judson slept in a chair outside his father's room. Nell moved between the stove and the wash basin, heating water, folding cloths, measuring drops from a brown medicine bottle. The fire sank low because neither remembered to feed it. By morning, the house had begun slipping back into its old silence. Elias spoke little. Judson spent hours searching drawers, ledgers, and old deed boxes. Worry made him formal. "Miss Archer," he said when asking for coffee. He had not called her that in weeks. A county notice arrived before noon. Elias's ability to manage the ranch would be questioned. The spring boundary would be reviewed. Nell might be called to testify about her place in the household. She brought Horace's letters to Judson. "You may need these." He did not take them. "I will not use your humiliation as a ranch tool." The words were honorable. Still, Nell heard the distance in them. Your humiliation. My ranch. That afternoon, Clara Albright arrived alone in a plain traveling coat. She asked to speak with Nell in the kitchen. "Did Horace truly promise to marry you?" Nell placed one letter on the table. She did not hand it over. Clara read the final line where it lay. "I will meet you in Copper Creek and make you my wife." Her face lost its color. "He told me you invented the arrangement." "He made both of us part of the same lie," Nell said. "Only one of us had farther to travel." Clara left without promising anything. Near sunset, Judson spoke with the doctor beside the porch. Nell stood near the partly open kitchen window, rolling clean bandages. "I cannot have her dragged before that town because of us," Judson said. The doctor lowered his voice. Marriage would silence the questions. Judson answered sharply, "I will not turn marriage into another contract she did not choose." A wagon rattled along the creek road, covering his next words. Nell heard only, "I will not marry her because the town demands it." She stepped away from the window before the noise faded. She did not hear him add, "I would rather lose the spring than make her wonder whether I wanted her or merely needed a defense." In her room, Nell opened the old suitcase. She folded the same 2 dresses she had carried from Ohio. Her mother's herbal notebook went on top. She counted the wages Judson had paid and placed Horace's unopened ticket money in a separate envelope. The written employment agreement remained on the bed. She left no farewell note. Instead, she placed the stew recipe on the kitchen table. At the bottom, she wrote, "Use less salt when he is tired." Before dawn, Nell entered Elias's room wearing her coat. He saw the suitcase beyond the doorway. "Judson dismiss you?" "No." "Then why are you letting Horace Abernathy dismiss you twice?" "Staying may cost you the ranch." Elias shifted against the pillows. "This ranch survived drought, fever, and debt. It will survive gossip." His voice weakened. "I am less certain my son will survive another empty kitchen." Nell lowered her eyes. When she returned to the kitchen, Judson stood beside the suitcase. "You meant to leave without speaking to me?" "A woman should leave while she still has the right to choose it." His hand moved toward his coat pocket, where the unfinished pine bird rested. "What made you believe you were unwanted?" A pounding struck the front door. Samuel Peterson stumbled inside, exhausted and streaked with mud. He carried folded papers beneath his coat. A copied telegram proved Horace knew Nell had left Ohio before he married Clara. Ledger pages showed supplies charged to Cray Ranch, but never delivered. Another entry recorded payment to the cattle owner challenging the spring. Samuel placed a written statement beside them. "I stayed quiet because he controlled my employment." Elias's voice came from the hallway. "A coward can still tell the truth. He simply tells it late." Samuel then explained that Horace believed the original spring agreement had been destroyed. "It was not destroyed," Elias said. Years earlier, Sarah had hidden it after a neighboring rancher tried to take it. She told Elias the kitchen would guard the ranch better than any safe. Nell looked around the room she had cleaned piece by piece. Her eyes settled on the flower cabinet. Its back panel was newer than the others. She had noticed the hollow sound when moving tins. The short copper nails matched those in Sarah's sewing basket. Judson pulled the cabinet from the wall. Behind the panel lay an oilcloth packet. Inside was the original spring agreement, still bearing the county seal. A smaller folded note rested beneath it. Judson opened the paper. A house remembers what grieving people forget. Sarah's handwriting filled the room with a silence different from the one before. Elias looked at Nell. The first night you came, I told him not to send you away before I ever tasted that stew. I heard you in the kitchen, saw you carry one small bowl to the barn and leave the rest for strangers. He turned toward Judson. He did not offer you work because you could cook. He offered because he saw what you did when no one was watching. Nell met Judson's eyes. For the first time, she understood his choice had begun before she had proved useful. Hoofbeats struck the frozen yard. A rider delivered notice that the hearing had been moved to that morning. If the Crays failed to appear, the spring claim could be decided without them. Judson reached for his coat. Nell still held the suitcase handle. He did not ask her to stay. Come to Copper Creek because the truth belongs to you, he said. After that, the road you take will be your own. Judson harnessed the wagon while Samuel helped Elias into his black coat. The old man leaned heavily on his cane, ignoring the doctor's warning with the stubbornness of someone who had already spent too many months in bed. Nell carried Sarah's oilcloth packet beneath one arm and Horace's letters beneath the other. Her suitcase remained in the wagon. The sky above the mountains had cleared, but the creek road was deep with mud. Twice, Judson climbed down to free a wheel with a fence rail. Nell held the reins while Elias sat beneath a wool blanket, breathing carefully through the strain. No one spoke of what would happen after the hearing. When the wagon struck a rut, Nell's hand slid across the seat and touched Judson's. Neither pulled away at once. The Copper Creek meeting hall was already crowded. Horace Abernathy stood near the front in a dark suit, looking as composed as if he had called the gathering himself. Clara sat several chairs away from him. Samuel took his place near the door. The county representative opened the hearing and asked Horace to state his complaint. Horace spoke calmly. He said Nell had entered Cray property without permission. He claimed she had used Elias's illness to establish herself in the house and influence ranch decisions. Because she held a personal grievance against him, he argued, nothing she said could be trusted. Nell waited until he finished. Then she placed the first letter on the table. Is that your handwriting? Horace glanced at the page. It is. She read only what was necessary. He would meet her at Copper Creek. He would marry her. He had prepared a home. She should sell what she could not carry. The room became still. Horace called the words friendly encouragement. Samuel stepped forward before anyone could answer. His voice shook, but he laid the copied telegram and ledger pages beside Nell's letter. The telegram proved Horace knew Nell had departed Ohio before his wedding to Clara. The store records showed false charges against Cray Ranch and money paid to the cattle owner who filed the spring challenge. Horace's face hardened. You ungrateful little clerk. Samuel swallowed. You paid me to keep books, not to rewrite what happened. Horace turned toward Clara. Sit down. She remained standing. Clara explained that Horace had married her partly to strengthen his store through her father's livery business. He told her Nell was not coming. After Nell arrived, he demanded silence. Clara removed one glove and placed it on the table beside him. I will not lend my name to this testimony. For the first time, Horace looked afraid. Judson opened Sarah's oilcloth packet. The county representative examined the original water agreement, its seal, and the signatures beneath it. An older rancher in the audience recognized both names. The document proved the spring lay within Cray property. Neighboring ranchers had been granted use of the overflow, not ownership. The challenge had no legal standing. Horace claimed Nell must have planted the paper. Elias rose with both hands on his cane. Sarah hid it before Nell Archer ever set foot in Colorado. The county representative dismissed the spring claim and rejected the competency petition. Horace gathered his papers, but anger made him careless. She has made a fool of you, Cray. Judson did not strike him. He stepped forward slowly. She found my father fading, my house empty, and me calling silence strength. She did not take anything from us. She gave back what grief had taken. Then he looked at Nell. But she is not valuable because she cooks, cleans, or saved this ranch. She was worth defending when she had nothing but wet clothes and one suitcase in my barn. Outside, the street smelled of mud, wet harness, and chimney smoke. Judson found Nell beside the wagon. "Would you ask me to stay?" she said. "If your father were strong, your cook stove cold, and another hand could do everything I have done. I would ask you to stay if the ranch were gone and all I owned was the wagon carrying us away. Why did you never say it?" Judson reached inside his coat and removed the unfinished pine bird. One wing was smooth, the other still showed the marks of his knife. "I began this after you came. I stopped because I feared asking you to stay might become another cage." He held it carefully between them. "I do not want a woman who has nowhere else to go. I want you, even with every road open." Nell looked toward the eastbound stage road. Then she closed her suitcase. She handed Horace's unopened envelope to Samuel. "Return it." When she faced Judson again, her voice was steady. "I came west because one man promised to choose me. I stayed because another gave me the right to choose for myself." She placed her hand in his. They returned to Cray Ranch near sunset. Nell carried the suitcase into her room. Judson remained outside the doorway until she invited him no farther than the hall. In the kitchen, the stew recipe still lay on the table. Judson added wood to the stove. Nell took out the iron pot. This time he stood beside her cutting potatoes while she browned the beef. Winter settled over the ranch slowly. Nell kept her wages in an account of her own. She managed the books and helped decide which cattle to purchase. Judson asked before taking her hand. She rode beside him through the lower pasture, and together they spoke of Sarah and of Nell's parents without shame or jealousy. Elias never became a young man again. Cold mornings kept him near the stove. He still needed his cane and sometimes tired before noon. But he ate at the table. He argued over fencing. He planned for spring. On the anniversary of the rainstorm, Judson led Nell into the barn. The hayloft was empty except for the old blanket she had left behind. He gave her the completed pine bird. Its wings were fully open. "The first night I thought you needed shelter," he said. "By morning, I knew I was the one living without it." Then he asked her to marry him. Nell studied the bird, then looked at him. "Only if the kitchen remains mine to rule." "The kitchen, the accounts, and half the arguments." She smiled. "Yes." They married the following spring inside the Cray house. A traveling minister performed the ceremony. Elias stood as Judson's witness. Clara brought apple preserves. Samuel arrived with fresh flour from another merchant. Nell wore thyme in her hair. The pine bird rested on the mantel. At supper, Elias lifted a spoonful of beef and barley stew. "This one has been causing trouble since the first night." Months later, another storm rolled down from the mountains. A knock sounded after dark. Judson opened the kitchen door and found a traveler beside a damaged wagon, wet and shivering. Nell asked no questions about money. She added water to the pot, cut another piece of bread, and set out a fourth bowl. Elias called from his chair. "Whoever cooked that had better make enough for the living and the nearly dead." The traveler laughed. The house answered with more voices than it once knew how to hold. Judson's wood box remained full. Nell's herbs survived beneath their wooden cover. Her old suitcase rested beneath the bed, no longer packed. The pine bird watched from the mantel. A spare bowl hung beside the stove for anyone who reached the ranch hungry. Outside, snow covered the road from Copper Creek. Inside, Nell passed behind Judson's chair and rested one hand briefly against his back. He reached up and touched her fingers. No grand speech followed. The stew simmered. The fire held. and the woman once hidden in the barn sat at the center of the table she had chosen as her own. Maybe that's why this story stays with me long after the last bowl of stew is served. Home is not always the place where your journey begins. Sometimes it's the place where someone sees your worth before you've had the chance to prove it. If you've ever carried old disappointments like a worn suitcase, if you've ever wondered whether you still belonged after life closed one door too many, then perhaps you understand what Nell and Judson found. Healing rarely arrives with grand speeches. More often it comes through a repaired lock, a warm meal waiting on the stove, a hand offered without pressure, and the quiet freedom to choose love instead of fear. I like to imagine that somewhere along an old Colorado road, another traveler still finds a light in that kitchen window and knows they won't face the night alone. That's the kind of legacy most of us hope to leave behind. Not wealth or fame, but a table where another soul can finally rest. I'd love to hear from you. Which moment in this story touched your heart the most, and why? If stories like this remind you that kindness, resilience, and faithful love still matter, I hope you'll join me again. There are many more journeys waiting just beyond the next trail. Stories of courage, mystery, healing, and hearts finding their way home. Until then, thank you for spending this time beside the fire.